Thank you, Madam Nakamitsu, for your statement. I now give the floor to the members of the Council who wish to make a statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation. Thank you, Mr. President. This is our last meeting of the Council on the Syrian chemical dossier this year, and so it's time to take stock. Unfortunately, it's far from encouraging, and the root of existing and newly emerging problems is not really in Syria. The main source of disappointment are the constant attempts to politicize the work of the OPCW, which brings us closer and closer to destroying one of the most important pillars of the non-proliferation of WMD's regime. This is not at all what we are trying to achieve, but the erosion in the trust in OPCW has taken on truly dire dimensions, no matter how our Western colleagues try to convince us otherwise. It's already impossible to hide the fact that the OPCW Technical Secretariat, at the bidding of certain states, is churning out one politically motivated report after another, and based on those reports, the governing bodies of the OPCW are pushing through discriminatory decisions against responsible member states, while the leadership of the OPCW plays along with these violations by avoiding a serious dialogue with member states who truly care about the fate and the reputation of the organization. The 26th session of the Conference of Member States of the Chemical Weapons Convention that ended recently, unfortunately, became a confirmation of these unsightly trends. Their culmination is the main sort of counter milestone of this year was the fact that a sovereign state, in the first time in the history of the OPCW, a state that scrupulously complied with its obligations under the convention, lost its rights. This is a massive blow to the reputation and the whole of the organization and the whole non-proliferation regime for chemical weapons. Its long-term consequences will only be understood further down the road. However, the erosion of international trust in the OPCW is already evident. Against the background of many significant and systemic contraventions, in light of this, I believe it's pointless to speak of the current report of the Director General on implementing Resolution 2118. Its main goal is, by any means, in spite of the facts and common sense, to present to Damascus in an unflattering light. And in this sense, it doesn't differ very much from all the previous reports of Mr. Arias. I'll be frank with you, the situation in the OPCW has deteriorated so much that we have no more guarantees that we'll even be able to return to some kind of starting point in order to restore the situation. This would require for the leadership of this organization to display courage and to recognize and correct the mistakes that it has made. However, it has not demonstrated such readiness and has only compounded the situation. This is precisely why in re-electing Mr. Arias, we dissociated ourselves from consensus. However, we continue to work with him. We'd like to hope that the leadership of the OPCW will draw the necessary conclusions from what is taking place. In particular, we are counting on a reasonable and responsible reaction to our concerns which have been expressed in the Security Council. In particular, exactly a year ago, we published a list of 8 questions regarding violations in the work of the Technical Secretariat. The Director General at the time refused to answer them in an open session. However, also in the course of closed consultations, we did not receive any responses. Half a year later, in June, during another briefing by Fernando Arias, we asked additional questions, and once again, we did not receive any answers on the substance. Instead of that, we received a clear disinformation and a direct distortion of the facts. For example, as we all recall, Mr. Arias intentionally distorted the essence of the exchange of notes between the permanent mission of Russia at the OPCW with the Technical Secretariat on the investigation of the fact-finding mission in Duma, leaving out the main conclusion made in our note that Russia insists on the fact that this incident was prearranged or staged. Because the The facts presented in the report of the fact-finding mission did not make it possible to conclude the use of toxic chemicals as a weapon. And that is just one example. There are many glaring inconsistencies and distortions in the replies of Mr. Arias. There are so many of them that we had to react by circulating our arguments as an official document of the Security Council. I think it won't be a surprise if I recall that the kind of questions that were asked were so unseemly that it would be impolite to answer them in polite company. The most important, but not only, subject of our concerns was the sadly notorious report of the fact-finding mission on the incident in Duma in April of 2018. As confirmed by various sources, including former inspectors of the OPCW itself, who were involved directly in investigating this topic. Its final version was radically edited compared to the initial version under pressure from certain delegations. In other words, de facto what happened was fraud. Attempts of these inspectors to get an investigation by the OPCW of what happened did not lead to anything. Even more, they were persecuted for their attempts to get to the truth. We know that the current leadership of the OPCW considers this topic a pain in the neck and is trying to hush it up in every possible way. Further evidence of this is the refusal by the Director General of to involve the Scientific Advisory Council to examine the situation with the Duma report. Reference to the fact that some kind of new decision of the governing bodies of the OPCW is necessary to do this, we believe is unconvincing. Requesting for the Scientific Advisory Council for an explanation by member states of the Chemical Weapons Convention on any issues relating to the implementation of the convention is envisioned in its Chapter 8. And yet, there's evidence of glaring manipulations in preparing the report of the fact-finding mission. Keep multiplying. In particular, in a number of media outlets, there's information that recently appeared about a meeting with 4 representatives of the Technical Secretariat with leading German specialists on chemical weapons in Germany in June of 2018. These German experts they only spent an hour to conclude that the evidence of symptoms of the victims in Duma do not correspond to the typical symptoms of the use of chloride as a military nerve agent. So the question is, why did the conclusions of these German specialists did not find a place in the report of the Tech Secretariat on Duma? The answer is clear. They did not fit in with the fabricated version by the Technical Secretariat of the events. The same thing happened with many other opinions and evidence. The report on Duma and its manipulation is a scandalous episode on its own, and some of our colleagues on the Security Council and the Technical Secretariat of the OPCW would prefer to forget about it. However, this is only the tip of the iceberg. These kinds of glaring inconsistencies and manipulations were characteristic to all previous reports on other episodes of the alleged use of chemical weapons in Syria, in Han Shehun, Sarakib, El Latamni, and others. Another topic on which we still haven't gotten an explanation is the initial declaration of Syria under the Chemical Weapons Convention. We have often asked Mr. Arias to explain why there's such a different approach to this matter towards Damascus compared to other countries which have had to deal with similar problems, but which were not targets of such a tidal wave of criticism as was the case in Syria. Although Syria, I just want to remind you, joined the convention in very complex military political conditions of instability and a terrorist threat fueled from abroad. And in spite of that, it has complied with all its obligations in good faith. And the Secretary General reported to the Security Council about this in June of 2014. The fact of a final elimination of the Syria's military chemical capacity was confirmed in 2016 by the Executive Council of the OPCW and the Conference of States Parties. In spite of the declarations of Mr. Arias, in accordance with the convention, and the technical secretariat has no right to apply to Syria any kind of complicated or politically motivated demands on verification. The very character of the mandate of the mission to determine initial declaration does not envision any kind of investigative powers. Its goal is simply to help the Syrians prepare its initial declaration. Nevertheless, in reality, the mission, with a nod from the technical secretariat, have become a fully fledged inspection team with self-appointed intrusive mandates. And the dialogue with the mission to assess the initial declaration. This is part of bilateral voluntary obligations which Syria undertook on itself. I think Syrian colleagues will be able to explain in more detail about their vision of their cooperation with the mission, and it will be interesting to hear them. We continue to be very concerned about the use by the Technical Secretariat of flawed methodology based on information from politicized sources, first and foremost from the notorious white helmets, and also information collected remotely. This is a direct violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, which has noted the need to actually witness the events in order to ensure a chain of custody. There are other questions. For example, why did Mr. Arias, why hasn't he visited the Syrian Arab Republic a single time and looked at the situation on the ground? And he keeps talking about that situation in his reports. The time has come for such a visit, but it's also an obligation of the head of the Technical Secretariat. Syria has invited him to do so. We don't understand what has prevented him from visiting the country. Unfortunately, all our attempts to engage in dialogue with the leadership of the Technical Secretariat have met with stonewalling, and not only on the Syrian chemical dossier. We have tried to get answers from the Technical Secretariat on a number of key issues which are important to clarifying what happened in the context of the incident with Mr. Navalny, without any success. For the time being, the Director General of the OPCW, just as our Western colleagues, continues to simply formally kind of wave us aside. Overall, I believe that given everything I have outlined, the Security Council has enough grounds to propose a dialogue with Mr. Arias in the near future. And we hope that he will prepare for that dialogue much better than he did in previous meetings with his participation. Thank you very much. Thank you for the representative of the Russian Federation.